When an empath meets a narcissist, something happens long before either of them realizes it. There's a psychological pull, an energetic recognition, almost like two parts of a story that fit together too easily. And from the outside, it often looks like the empath is chosen because they are kind, forgiving, or naturally giving. But the real reason lies much deeper. It's rooted in unconscious patterns, early wounds, and the dynamics Carl Jung described long before modern psychology ever coined the term narcissist. An empath often feels people before they understand them. They sense emotions like subtle shifts in the atmosphere. They notice tension, sadness, anger, even when nothing is said. This sensitivity makes them compassionate, intuitive, and deeply connected to the emotional world of others. But it also makes them vulnerable to the kind of person who lives behind a mask. The narcissist is drawn to this emotional openness because it represents something they've lost, something buried under layers of defenses and illusions. The empath feels like safety, like warmth, like a place where the narcissist can finally exhale. And in the beginning, the connection feels intense, meaningful, almost destined. From a Jungian perspective, every person wears a persona, a social mask designed to function in the world. Narcissists rely on this mask far more heavily than others. Their persona is polished, confident, magnetic, and convincing. But beneath it lies a fragile, wounded self, a shadow full of shame, insecurity, and unmet needs. When a narcissist meets an empath, they sense that this person has the capacity to see behind masks. Not because the empath pushes or analyzes, but because their presence naturally invites authenticity. The narcissist feels simultaneously exposed and comforted. It's a paradox. They fear being seen, yet crave it desperately. For the empath, their early phase feels almost intoxicating. Narcissists are exceptionally skilled at mirroring, showing the empath exactly what they long to feel. They reflect back warmth, attention, resonance, and familiarity. The empath feels deeply understood, sometimes more than ever before. But this isn't true understanding, it's imitation. The narcissist builds a version of themselves based on the empath's desires, values, and emotional landscape. And in doing so, they become temporarily whole. This illusion of connection is not sustainable, and yet both people often fall for it. Many empaths grew up in environments where they had to tune into others in order to stay safe, emotionally, sometimes even physically. They learn to anticipate mood shifts, to soothe, to calm, to adapt. This early conditioning becomes an unconscious blueprint. When they meet a narcissist, something in that early wiring lights up. The empath steps into familiar territory. They understand chaos, unpredictability, emotional withdrawal, and the need to constantly regulate someone else's inner world. It feels strangely natural, even when it's exhausting. Jung described how unconscious wounds seek expression in adult relationships. What we have not healed, we repeat. What we have not integrated, we attract. And for many empaths, the narcissist activates an old internal story, the story of wanting to be chosen, wanting to be seen, wanting to matter. The narcissist, with their intense attention at the beginning, feels like the answer to that story. The empath feels finally appreciated, finally valued. They don't realize that this intensity is not love, it's idealization. Meanwhile, the narcissist is drawn to the empath's stability, emotional intelligence, and compassion. These qualities act like an internal support system the narcissist does not possess. The empath becomes a mirror that reflects the narcissist's desired identity back to them. They feel powerful, admired, even elevated. But this external validation cannot fill an internal void, and when the empath inevitably cannot maintain the constant emotional supply, the narcissist begins to feel threatened. The admiration they once felt turns into resentment. What makes this dynamic so magnetic is the invisible emotional contract created between both people. The empath promises connection, safety, understanding. The narcissist promises intensity, presence, and the illusion of specialness. They both get something, but neither gets what they actually need. As the relationship deepens, the empath begins to sense the narcissist's inconsistencies. Subtle shifts in tone, sudden coldness, withdrawal, irritability, or a lack of empathy. These signs often confuse the empath. They feel responsible, as if they must have done something wrong. They search for the version of the narcissist from the beginning, the idealized, attentive, almost enchanting figure. And in that search, they give more. They offer more patience, more kindness, more understanding. They overfunction in the relationship, hoping the harmony will return. The narcissist interprets this self-sacrifice as confirmation of power, not necessarily consciously, but emotionally. Control becomes soothing. Dependency becomes proof of importance. And so the dynamic tightens. The empath becomes more drained. The narcissist becomes more entitled. And the initial harmony turns into imbalance. Jung believed that every relationship is a meeting of two unconscious systems. The empath brings healing energy, emotional depth, and a willingness to carry what others cannot. The narcissist brings charisma, intensity, and the activation of deeply buried wounds. Together, they recreate an emotional dance that is as ancient as their earliest attachments. But underneath this dynamic lies a truth that is difficult for the empath to accept. Narcissists choose empaths because empaths make them feel whole. They choose them because empaths regulate their emotions, fill their emptiness, stabilize their insecurities, and reflect back an image they wish were true. Narcissists do not seek partners, they seek mirrors. And empaths by nature are exceptionally reflective. Yet what makes the empath powerful is exactly what makes them vulnerable. They believe in the goodness of people. They give second chances. They see potential where others see danger. And narcissists exploit this hope. Not always maliciously, but instinctively. The empath becomes a source of life force for the narcissist, a steady emotional current that the narcissist draws from without ever truly reciprocating. Over time, the empath begins to feel the emotional cost. Fatigue, confusion, self-doubt, and a sense of walking on eggshells become part of daily life. The empath starts questioning their worth, their stability, their intuition. They wonder why the love they offer is not enough. They wonder why the relationship feels both deeply meaningful and deeply painful. This confusion is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of how powerful the psychological bond has become. Narcissists create cycles, idealization, devaluation, intermittent reinforcement, that mirror the attachment wounds of the empath. Jung would say that the relationship becomes a stage where unresolved childhood patterns are reenacted in an attempt to find resolution. But resolution never comes, because the narcissist cannot meet the empath in the emotional world where healing happens. As the relationship continues, subtle patterns begin to show themselves, and for an empath, these patterns often feel strangely familiar, not because they consciously recognize them, but because the emotional texture of the relationship brings them back into an old role. The one who soothes, the one who repairs, the one who holds everything together. And this is exactly the moment when the narcissist's interest intensifies. They sense the empath's emotional availability, and they lean on it, often without realizing how much weight they're placing on the other person. Imagine the empath sitting at dinner with the narcissist. The evening starts light and easy, but the narcissist suddenly withdraws. Something small bothered them, a tone of voice, a perceived slight, an imagined insult. They go quiet. Their expression hardens. The empath immediately shifts inside. They scan for what went wrong. They soften their voice. They lean in. They apologize for something they didn't even do. They try to restore harmony because conflict feels unsafe, or at least deeply uncomfortable. This moment seems insignificant, but it's the beginning of a psychological conditioning. The narcissist learns that emotional withdrawal creates compliance, and the empath learns that love requires self-abandonment. These micro moments accumulate. A look, a sigh, a sarcastic remark, a sudden cold shoulder. The empath feels these changes in their body, sometimes even before they register them mentally. Their nervous system responds instantly. Fix this. Make it better. And the narcissist, who cannot regulate their own emotions, relies on the empath to do it for them. Another example is the way narcissists use intensity to win trust. In the beginning, they listen closely. They remember details. They mirror dreams, fears, desires. A narcissist might say things like, "I've never felt this connected to anyone," or "You understand me better than anyone ever has." For the empath, who is often used to being the emotional caretaker, this feels like a reciprocity they've always longed for. But later, this same intensity becomes a weapon. The narcissist might say, "You're the only one who ever loved me," but then follow it with, "And that's why you should be able to handle my moods." Or, "You know how sensitive I am, you should understand me." The emotional logic becomes distorted. Because you love me, you must tolerate my inability to love you back in the same way. This dynamic deepens when the narcissist senses that the empath is forgiving. Empaths naturally try to understand where pain comes from. They ask themselves, why did they react that way? What wound is underneath? And because of that compassion, they often excuse harmful behavior. If the narcissist snaps, the empath thinks, maybe they're overwhelmed. If the narcissist lies, the empath thinks, maybe they were afraid. If the narcissist withdraws, the empath thinks, maybe I asked for too much. And slowly, very slowly, accountability disappears from the relationship. One of the clearest examples of this dynamic is when the narcissist's behavior swings between warmth and coldness. One day they're affectionate, attentive, deeply present. The next day they're distant, critical, or irritated over something trivial. The empath doesn't understand the shift, so they try harder. They become more careful with their words. They adjust their needs. They shrink themselves just a little bit, and then a little bit more. This intermittent reward pattern creates what psychologists call a trauma bond, but what Jung would call a meeting of wounds, not souls. The narcissist is not choosing the empath because they want to hurt them. They're choosing them because the empath feels familiar in the most unconscious way. The empath becomes the emotional parent, the mirror, the regulator, the healer. They become the safe place where the narcissist hides from their own emptiness. But behind that facade, something deeper is happening. The narcissist is drawn to the empath's light, but that same light threatens them. When the empath shines, when they set boundaries, when they express needs, When they show independence, the narcissist feels exposed. The empath's authenticity highlights the narcissist's inauthenticity, and so the narcissist pushes back. They may belittle the empath's achievements, subtly undermine their confidence, or question their intuition. Imagine the empath excitedly sharing a personal project or a small victory. The narcissist listens, nods, and then says something like, "Are you sure that's really a big deal?" Or, "I don't think people will care as much as you think." It seems small, but it lands deeply. Doubt begins to replace self-trust, and that doubt is exactly what keeps the empath in place. Another recognizable moment. The empath finally expresses a need, something simple like, "I felt hurt when you spoke to me that way." Instead of empathy, the narcissist reacts with defensiveness, irritation, or even rage. They might accuse the empath of being too sensitive or dramatic. The empath ends up comforting the narcissist after being hurt by them. This role reversal is subtle but powerful. It teaches the empath that having needs is dangerous, while the narcissist learns that emotional discomfort can be avoided by shifting blame. Jung argued that we are most vulnerable to exploitation when we are disconnected from our own shadow, our own unmet needs, boundaries, anger, instincts. Many empaths grew up needing to be the good child, the one who made peace, the one who stayed quiet, the one who held everything together. So when they meet a narcissist, their old pattern awakens. If I love enough, things will stay calm. This is not conscious. It's survival-based, and narcissists instinctively sense this pattern. One of the most painful but recognizable experiences comes when the empath finally feels drained and asks for support. They might say, "I need you to be there for me," or "I feel alone in this." Instead of responding with care, the narcissist becomes irritated or accuses the empath of being needy. This reinforces the message, "Your emotional needs are a burden." The empath begins to self-silence. They stop asking. They stop reaching out. They stop expressing hurt. They shrink into the small spaces the narcissist allows them. And this shrinking changes the empath's identity. They start questioning who they are, what they feel, and whether their intuition can be trusted. Narcissists often gaslight without even meaning to. They rewrite reality in a way that protects their fragile ego. The empath becomes disoriented, unsure of what is real. They may think, "Maybe it wasn't that bad," or "Maybe I'm overreacting." The clarity they once had dissolves. There is also the moment when the empath starts carrying both emotional worlds, their own and the narcissist's. They try to anticipate needs, avoid triggers, maintain peace, and keep the relationship afloat. They become therapist, caretaker, emotional buffer, and the narcissist becomes increasingly dependent on this invisible labor. This dependency is why narcissists seek empaths. They need someone who can hold the emotional weight they cannot bear. And yet, beneath every example, beneath every pattern, there is an essential truth. The empath is not weak. The empath is powerful. It takes emotional strength to feel so deeply. It takes resilience to keep loving. It takes courage to give. The problem is not the empath's sensitivity. It's the imbalance created when sensitivity meets entitlement. The narcissist chooses the empath not because the empath is easy to manipulate, but because the empath shines in ways the narcissist cannot. The empath loves in ways the narcissist cannot. The empath heals in ways the narcissist cannot. And that combination feels irresistible until the empath begins to awaken. As the empath slowly begins to wake up inside the relationship, something fundamental shifts. They start noticing the patterns instead of absorbing them. The moments of withdrawal, the subtle criticisms, the emotional swings. They stop feeling like personal failures and start looking like clues. The empath begins to realize that no amount of love, patience, softness, or understanding can heal someone who refuses to face their own shadow. One of the first signs of this awakening is a quiet inner voice that says, "This doesn't feel right." It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it's subtle but persistent. The empath may start pulling back just slightly, taking a breath before responding, choosing silence over immediate soothing, setting a tiny boundary. And this is often when the narcissist reacts most intensely. They sense that the emotional system they depend on is shifting. The empath is no longer fully available to regulate their world. A simple example. The empath stops apologizing automatically. They stop explaining themselves when they didn't do anything wrong. They stop bending their needs into shapes that fit the narcissist's comfort. And even these small changes feel like an earthquake in the dynamic. The narcissist may become irritated, confused, or more controlling, but the empath begins to feel something they haven't felt in a very long time. Space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to notice how tired they are. This is the moment when clarity returns. The empath realizes that the relationship was built not on equal exchange, but on emotional labor that only flowed one way. They see how often they absorbed pain that wasn't theirs, how often they twisted themselves to keep the peace, how often they carried both hearts while theirs was breaking quietly. And this recognition isn't about blaming the narcissist, it's about seeing the pattern. Jung believed that when a person becomes conscious of a cycle, the cycle loses its power. Awareness dissolves repetition. The empath begins to understand that they weren't chosen because they were weak. They were chosen because they were strong. Because they could hold emotions others ran from. Because they had the resilience to carry what others could not. When an empath reaches this point, the connection changes. The narcissist no longer feels like destiny. They feel like a lesson. A mirror that reflected back the empath's own wounds, their tendency to overgive, to over-understand, to hope beyond all reason. And this shift is powerful. The empath stops trying to heal the relationship and begins to heal themselves. They reconnect with their own needs, and those needs stop feeling like burdens. They rediscover their own intuition, and it stops feeling dramatic. They feel their own boundaries, and those boundaries stop feeling dangerous. The empath begins to take their own inner child by the hand and say, "You don't have to earn love anymore." And in this new clarity, the narcissist's behavior becomes easier to understand. Their idealization wasn't real connection. Their devaluation wasn't truth. Their withdrawal wasn't your fault. Their praise wasn't love. Their criticism wasn't insight. It was all part of a system designed to protect their fragile self-image. And the empath finally sees that they were never meant to save anyone. They were meant to awaken to themselves. When the empath steps out of the role of healer, the bond weakens. When they stop pouring their energy into a bottomless well, the spell breaks. And this moment, this quiet breaking, is the beginning of the empath's return to their own power. Walking away, or even emotionally detaching, isn't easy. It requires undoing survival patterns that were formed long before the narcissist ever appeared. But once the empath starts choosing themselves, everything changes. They start seeing love differently. They start valuing peace over intensity. They start recognizing red flags that once looked like passion. They begin to understand that healthy love feels steady, reciprocal, safe, and nourishing, not confusing, exhausting, or dramatic. Jung believed that true transformation begins the moment we stop abandoning ourselves. And that is exactly what happens when an empath steps out of this dynamic. They reclaim their voice. They reclaim their intuition. They reclaim their depth, their softness, their inner wisdom. They stop being the mirror for someone else's insecurity and start becoming the guardian of their own soul. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this journey is that the empath does not become harder. They become clearer. They don't stop feeling deeply. They feel wisely. They don't close their heart. They simply stop opening it to every wound that calls itself love. Their sensitivity becomes a gift again, not a burden. If you're an empath who has been through this, or you're in it right now, remember this. The moment you stop giving your light to someone who thrives in your shadow, you begin to see who you truly are. And once you see yourself clearly, you cannot be unseen. If this video helped you understand your own story more deeply, I would love for you to stay connected. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next Jungian deep dive. Your healing, your awareness, and your journey matter, and we explore all of it here.